Morning, everyone. It's now the appointed time for a meeting, and we have a quorum. We'll start today's Public Works Subcommittee meeting. It's going to last for 2 hours. In 2023, up to the last meeting, we have endorsed 7 projects. The total amount is $48,248,800,000. There are 3 papers for discussion on the agenda for the meeting. All of them are new funding proposals submitted by the administration. The 3 funding proposals involved a total allocation of $1,234.1 million. If all funding proposals are passed, the total endorsed projects would be 10, and the total amount would be $49,482,900,000. Excluding land acquisition and computerized program, the total amount for projects would be $37,682,300,000. I remind members that in accordance with Rule 83A of the Rules Procedure of the Legislative Council, you should disclose the nature of any direct or indirect pecuniary interests relating to the funding proposals. I also draw members' attention to ROP 84 on voting in case of direct pecuniary interest. The first item is A71CL site formation and infrastructure works for public housing development at Kwok Shui Road, Tsuen Wan. The paper number is PWSC 2023-224-1. It seeks to upgrade the part of the project to Category A in money of the day prices. The estimated cost is $83.1 million. The administration has consulted the panel on housing on this proposal on 5th of December 2022. And members of the panel supported the submission of the funding proposal to the subcommittee for consideration. A report on the gist of the panel's discussion was sent to members for reference via email yesterday, that is 11th of April. The government representatives that are here to answer the questions include Mr. Esmond Wong from the Housing Bureau, Mr. Daniel Leung from Assistant Director of Housing, Mr. William Wong, Chief Architect from the Housing Department, Mr. Ricky Wong from the Civil Engineering and Development Department, Mr. Lee Kwai Wing also from the Civil Engineering and Development Department as Chief Engineer. I can see that 2 members have pressed the request to speak button. Each would have 4 minutes. First would be Dr. Chow Man Kwong. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask at Kwok Shui Road, the roads are quite narrow. I heard from the administration that they are to widen the roads there because there is not much room for widening there. I want to know more about government's plans on that. Also, in this proposal, there are 3 domestic blocks. They are to provide 1,700 units. Are they public housing or are they TPS housing? Also, I have looked at the distribution of Tsuen Wan district. Below 64 years old and below about 65 years old, it would be 16.2%. So that's up. It can grow up to about a third of the population there. So with the aging population, would you have the 5 lowest floors for elderly centers? They can be model units that can be demonstration to the elderly population. Also, with regard to the East Kwai Chung Public School, it stopped its service in 2017. It is only demolished now, so it's been there for 16 years. So will the government expedite the progress with future structures like these? Because I believe the condition is quite dilapidated there. So if the government can expedite this progress, I want to hear if the government will do something like that in future. All right. Thank you, Chair. Good morning. regarding what Dr. Chow asked about. Actually, at Kwok Shui Road for phase 1, we're only going to do site formation works. Our colleague from the CEDD would widen the Kwok Shui Road into phase 2 from 7.3 meters with 2 lanes. It would be widened to 9.3 meters. Actually, for the public housing project at Kwok Shui Road, we would reserve some land for widening this program. In phase 2, the proposal to be submitted by CEDD. The works were just gazetted. We have yet to receive any objection. Colleagues from the CEDD or we from the Housing Bureau will coordinate on that to widen the roads. We hope to obtain phase 2 funding at the Finance Committee in this year. As for the public housing project at Kwok Shui Road, we haven't decided whether it's going to be public housing or home ownership scheme flats. We want to remain flexible so that if there's any change in demand for subsidized housing, we can remain flexible still. As for your point about aging population, we do understand that there will be a lot more elderly persons in future. We would have elderly facilities. We would have residential care homes for the elderly, center, daycare center for the elderly, etc., to accommodate the elderly population in the district. As for development of schools, as you said, it stopped service in 2007 because there weren't enough students. Actually, according to the central allocation mechanism, it has been planned for development already. And in 2018, there has been a proposal to develop it into something else, but it was terminated then. And the Planning's department immediately took a different direction and consulted the district council on that proposal. And now we're rolling out this, pushing forward this proposal to construct public housing. All right, next, Mr. Tony Che. Thank you, Chair. I would agree with what Dr. Chow Man-Kwong said about the site being left vacant for so long. But of course, this is something in the past now. But I hope the government can learn from that and not to waste such valuable resource in future. Well, this piece of land is located in the middle of Tai Wo Hao and Kwai Hing, and there are many industrial buildings nearby. How can you enhance connectivity? Because from the plan, in phase 2, works are going to be done about a footbridge. So I hope that the footbridge can keep pace with the development in the district so that it can facilitate pedestrians, so that it will enhance their connectivity. Also in paragraph 8, it was said that because the Kwai Fong public school is now vacant and it's unsuitable for development into public housing. Well, I want to ask, does it refer to this site, school site itself, so that now you're doing the site formation works for the whole site? Also, you would use $13.4 million for the demolition of a school. Well, I can't see clearly from the plan if the school is one story or something. Can you provide more information on that? For example, the number of stories, the area, because you have to spend 13.4 million on that. So I want to know why the cost of demolition is relatively high. My last point is, well, in paragraph 17, 502 trees, out of that, 9 trees will be preserved. Of the trees that will be felled, 1 tree is of particular interest. Well, for such trees of particular interest, because it is located on a slope, if you have to fell it, what will you deal with it? Will you send it to the landfill? Thank you. Now, Assistant Director, please. Thank you for your question. With regard to the vacant school side, we do understand. We will pass on your comments to our colleagues. We would want to do better in future. Now, paragraph 8. It was said that it is not suitable for public housing development purpose. It is only 1 story high and it is quite old. It cannot be used as temporary housing or permanent housing. So we will demolish the school to have vacant land for approximately 40-story high public housing. Now, as said, the school is only 1 story high. Well, you may not be able to see it clearly from the plan. In paragraph 27, with regard to the trees being felled, well, for the trees that are felled normally, we would have to compensate for that. As said in the document, in the Castle Peak Road, Kwok Chung section, we will plant trees there. We will also plant trees in the vicinity to match with the development to beautify the landscape. There are something that I want to follow up on. Well, you've mentioned that it's 1 story high, because I want to know about the area as well, because the cost is quite high. Perhaps you can give me the figures after the meeting. So that I can tell whether the cost is reasonable. Also, with regard to the trees being felled, what are you going to do about the soil? And what will you do about the felled trees? Will you treat them like rubbish and send them to the landfill? Or would you have special arrangements for those, including trees of particular interest? Chair, I would want them to provide more information on that. Please give a brief reply. All right. With regard to trees that are felled, the current arrangement will be that it will be sent to Y8. We hope to reuse that in future. We have 3 directions for that. We would reduce, recycle, and reuse them. If they are felled, if we can reuse them, we will, to prevent wastage of trees. We would want to send them to Y Park. We would call it a park. It can be used as fertilizer or biological charcoal so that they can be reused. As for the demolished school, I'll let my colleague from the CEDD to give some information on that. Actually, with the building itself, it's 1 story high, as said. There are brick walls and steel roof. We would have to see during demolition if there's any waste going to be produced. So we would need to conduct study for that. So we reserve money for that. Next, Ms. Jophie Chan. Well, during the panel of housing meeting, I suggested not just consulting the Tsuen Wan District Council, but also the Kwok Chung District Council, because it is located near Kwok Chung. So I understand that the administration consulted them before this meeting, so I do thank the administration for taking in my suggestion. I also, with Chan On-ne and another member, we have consulted members of the public. We've heard members of the public express that they want more facilities there, for example, youth centers, elderly centers, parking spaces, etc. So we understand that the administration would have to accord priority to which facilities to provide. We have consulted members of the public on that. Well, later on, I will give a more comprehensive written suggestion to the administration for their consideration. They are views from the members of the public. So I wish the administration would take them into account. Also, from the document, it was said that temporary traffic arrangements will be implemented and there will be control measures for the works vehicles. Well, the Kwok Shui Road tunnel, many buses would pass through that section of the road. How many buses will be affected? I want to know about that. Also, for the access of works vehicles, that will also worsen the traffic congestion in the area. So I want the government to tell us more about the traffic control arrangements and the ancillary facilities. Thank you.
Assistant Director, Mr. Daniel Leung. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chu Fi Chan. Well, we understand that the community has hopes as well as needs on facilities together with the SWD and the District Council. After consultation, we understand that there are demands. On young people, we have online youth support team to provide counseling to hidden youth. We also have office as well as child care center. We have a 6-classroom kindergarten. We hope that we can take care of young people as well as children. In terms of parking spaces, we have over 200 parking spaces. According to the Hong Kong Planning Standards and Guidelines, we have already achieved the cap of the parking spaces. On traffic arrangements before the construction, I will defer to my colleagues from the CEDD. Mr. Ricky Wong. Thank you, Chairman. Based on our estimate, for the exit of Kwok Shui Road, at the peak, there are 7 large vehicles. And there are a lot of lorries going in and out of the industrial buildings. Right now, the traffic situation is still fair. On Kwok Shui Road, there are 3 bus routes: 36, 235, and 32M. We hope that during peak hours, we will stop the large vehicles from going in and out. The road will be widened from 7.3 meters to 9.5 meters. When there is ongoing traffic, there will not be much of an impact on the traffic flow in the vicinity. Well, I have just one thing to add. As the Hong Kong Planning Standards and Guidelines might not have considered motorcycles, we understand that there is a very long-standing shortage of parking spaces for motorcycles. A lot of public housing estates are built on the hillside in quieting areas, so we may have to take that into account. That is the demand for motorcycle public parking spaces. We have already set aside 16 parking spaces for motorcycles. So for this project, land formation, site formation and infrastructure work for public housing development at Kwok Shui Road, Tsuen Wan, there is still time and room, so we welcome members to raise questions. Ms. Jovi Chen has given us some comments, and you will provide us with a written reply after the meeting, and I believe that the administration will welcome these comments. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to follow up on traffic arrangements. Ms. Jovi Chen also mentioned a point, that is on Kwok Shui Road, the traffic flow there is quite worrying. We appreciate that the administration is well aware of the problem and will widen the road. In the course of construction, right now it is just 7 odd meters, and there is no way for dual direction traffic when there is a large vehicle occupies both sections of the road. So in terms of time, the so-called off-peak hours, I have doubt. For example, during commuting hours or lunch hours, these are off-peak hours. By contrast, for off-peak hours in industrial buildings, that is actually the peak hours for the other category of people. So I hope that the administration will collect more figures in order to have a more accurate analysis. A lot of the public housing estates are built on the hillside in the vicinity, and we have talked about the barrier-free access, the construction of which is very slow. We have been talking about this for a lot of years. In addition to Lo Tak Wai, a lot of them go to Shak for grocery shopping, etc. So it is quite inconvenient for residents in the locality for barrier-free access. What opinions do you have? What do you think about this? For public service projects, the area is actually quite densely populated. So what about daycare center for senior citizens as well as that for children? There is a serious lack of these facilities in the locality, and I'd like to know whether the administration has any plan to add these facilities for the convenience of our citizens. Assistant Director, please. Thank you, Member. In the course of construction, CEDD colleagues and we will also make arrangements in order to reduce nuisance caused to residents in the locality. We will allow some flexibility in the contract so as to allow alleviated traffic congestion or traffic conditions. Of course, we will have barrier-free access. We will discuss this issue with the CEDD and the TD. We have set aside 5% of social welfare facilities. There are projects in relation to children, but we do not have any right now for senior citizens. We will relate your view to the SWD to see whether there is any room to implement this. There is a great demand for these facilities for senior citizens. 20% to 30% of the population are elderly people in the locality, hence a very great demand. We hope that you will seriously consider this suggestion. Mr. Louis Long, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions. In paragraph 6, you mention you will upgrade the remainder of 871 CL to Category A after the relevant statutory procedures are completed. So I suppose this is infrastructure. So what will the statutory procedures include? This is my first question. The second question is about paragraph 27 in the document. You will have to fell a tree of particular interest. That is an incense tree it is still of particular interest despite the medium amenity value. You said that it is not suitable for transplanting. But then you are saying that you will adopt a multi-platform design to conduct the relevant site formation works. I'd like to know about this new method. Can we preserve this incense tree by way of the new multi-platforms designs? AD. Thank you, Mr. Louis Long. In paragraph 6, for phase 1 of the works project, we'd like members to consider site formation works, and we have phase 2 works. The CEDD colleague will carry out road widening works, and there is a pedestrian crossbay bridge spanning Castle Peak Road, as we need to gazette the relevant widening road works. So we hope to complete it as soon as possible so that we can bring this forward to the Finance Committee for consideration. On the incense tree, CEDD, please. Mr. Ricky Wong. The incense tree's location, it is built on the hillside. There is a slope, and the incense tree is planted on the hillside towards Castle Peak Road, Kwai Chung section. Right now, the root of the incense tree, as it is planted on the hillside, it is not in balance. It is mechanically not convenient. If we have to remove it, uproot it, and transplant it on a flat surface, its survival rate will still be low. So at this stage, we recommend felling the tree on the multi-platforms designs, as that is a hillside. It is 26 meters MPD. We need to reduce it to 14, 16, 18 MPD so that we can also reduce the amount of soil to be removed. So that is not having a lot to do with the preservation of the tree. Mr. Louis Long, it is built, well, the tree is actually planted on the hillside, so despite the multi-platforms designs, we cannot preserve the tree anyway. Is that correct? Right, because if we have to reduce the height from 26 MPD to 14, 16, 18, etc., it is impossible for us to retain the tree. The AD responded to me in relation to paragraph 6. I'd like to know about the remaining parts of the project. For the remaining phases, when will you bring it up to the PWSC? Well, we hope to do it as soon as possible, as the gazettal procedure has just been completed. In the second quarter, we will have completed all the design. And if possible, we want to, by Q1 next year, or even earlier, we will complete all procedures and submit it to the Finance Committee for approval. Thank you, Chairman. Next, Dr. Tik Chi-yun, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. On public housing, the government has set aside 5% for social welfare purposes. We welcome this suggestion. What about the detailed calculation of 5%? How did you arrive at this figure? For the whole plot of land, did you base on the total usable area or the total floor area of the building? How do you actually arrive at this figure? For elderly care homes, elderly care center, will it be 1 story high or 2 story high, or will it be an independent building? Next, on policy issues, do you have a policy to help with the planning of these facilities? AD, please. Thank you, member. The calculation of the 5% figure is based on the gross floor area of the, that is the domestic gross floor area. The area is 1.3 hectares in total. According to the guidelines, it will be 24 meters or below in order to make it easier for senior citizens to go in and out. It will be beneath the main buildings. It will have its independent access as well as the lift. There will not be any conflict with the structures or buildings. On the policy level, we want to dovetail with the public housing that will be commissioned in 2026 to 2027. We want to set aside 5% of the domestic gross floor area for social welfare facilities, and these are what is being rolled out.
Chair, I wish to follow up on this. Of course, we would welcome the concept of 5% being allocated, but if you're talking about the total building floor area, 3% or 5%, it would be 3 to 5 floors. Can you be a bit more flexible? Can you have more? For example, if you have 5% of land, perhaps you can build more stories for youth facilities as well as elderly facilities. Is that something you can consider in your proposal? Assistant Director, correct. For certain sites, if we still have land left over after the plot ratio is used up, we would want to provide more welfare facilities in a standalone building. I think that's a very good thing to do, and that's what we hope to achieve. As we often say, if we are constructing a 40-story high building with normal piling, we can complete it in 3 years. Right now, it takes 4 or 5 years to complete because often the social welfare facilities would be located on the lower floors of the building, so it would take more time for us to design those. So on a policy level, as announced in the 2022 policy address, we hope to expedite the progress of population intake for public housing. If social welfare facilities can be provided in a standalone building, it would be able to expedite the progress of the construction of public housing. So that is something we're trying to do in the construction of public housing. I would appreciate your proposal on that. Thank you. I'm sure members have noted that in recent housing projects that have been submitted to us for consideration, there are many social welfare facilities to be provided, so that is a must. As for whether they will be provided in a standalone building or in a public housing block, well, it would depend on the circumstances. But members would support the direction in which the department, the bureau, is taking. Now, Mr. Attorney, Chair, Vice Chairman, your second round, please. Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up on something, because this proposal would involve site formation works and the construction of slopes. It would also involve the demolition of the Kwok Shui Public School. The administration said earlier, with regard to the school to be demolished, it's only 1 story high, and it's quite old. I think the cost for demolition is quite high. Well, because we don't have information on the basis on which the figure is derived, so I don't know if it's really too high or if it's the fact that you have provided a higher figure because there will be another phase of site formation works to be done, and this demolition of school would be a separate project to be undertaken. Well, I hope that the estimate is accurate, because you don't know what the condition is then, because for demolition you have reserved funds at that moment, but then it may be more expensive in future. Well, in future, when we have more projects, if you have put in a higher figure in the proposal, it may not be best for the optimal allocation of government funding. So I hope the administration can have a better grasp of the estimate. Well, that's just my suggestion, Chair. I do understand that the proposal has been considered, but I do want the estimates to be more accurate. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, we have already invited tenders. We are currently reviewing the tenders. In the Finance Committee meeting, we will include that in the estimates and we'll seek funding then. Apart from demolition, we have to do 3D laser scanning to have records of the schools. We would also want to preserve the plaques and features of the schools and give them to the Rural Committee for preservation. Because these plaques or these components will be of value in terms of preservation, we may have it displayed in future after the public housing development project is completed. We will include such costs in the estimates. Well, actually, that is exactly what wasn't explained before that made me think the cost was quite high, because that is not something that has to be done originally in normal demolition of schools. So that's why I had to ask about it, and the administration has to talk about it. Otherwise, people would think that why would you need $10 million for the demolition of an H school? Well, as you said earlier, because there are other requirements, it's different from ordinary demolition works, which is why the cost is higher. So I want the administration to give a more comprehensive explanation for such proposals, because otherwise members of the public would think it's such a high cost for a demolition. And it would give off the impression that the administration is not acting as a gatekeeper of funds. Well, in future, I think in the document it can give a more comprehensive explanation. But again, I would support the direction in which the department is taking, because it may not be graded as something of preservation value, but I do think certain components of schools or such buildings are worth preserved. And if you have colleagues looking into that, we do appreciate that. But you can perhaps mention that in the document in future so there won't be any doubts. Well, also thank you, Mr. Tony Jer, for your suggestion. Next, Mr. Louis Long, 3 minutes. Well, I would like to follow up on the incense tree issue. Your assessment is that because the tree is located on a slope and the root ball is uneven, which makes it unsuitable for transplanting. Well, I know nothing much about the transplanting of trees, but I do have a suggestion, naive as it may be. If you can transplant it to another slope, is that feasible? Well, Mr. Ricky Wong, please. Actually, I have done another project in Tsuen Wan. Again, it's an incense tree located on a slope. We have successfully transplanted it on another slope. Indeed, yes, your suggestion is feasible. Well, but this site is located in an urban area. It would be hard to locate a similar environment in the district. right now, only in the vicinity, there are only flat grounds. We cannot locate a similar environment for the tree to be transplanted. We've also talked to landscapers from our department. We wanted to see if we can plant other trees as compensation, and that is feasible. Thank you. Well, I understand that many members are concerned about trees. However, members should note that the recent projects that have been submitted to us for consideration, colleagues from the government departments have been quite prudent with regard to their approach to trees. Of course, we would hope that these trees can be preserved, especially those of particular interest. But I believe colleagues from the government departments hold the same attitude. If indeed that is not feasible, they will plant other trees as compensation. All right, thank you. There being no further questions from members, I'll put the item to vote. For members who are for this proposal PWSC 2023-24-1, well, all of you would agree. I can see that all members have raised their hands to agree to this proposal. So all members agree on this proposal, and this proposal is passed. Next, will you agree that the Public Works Subcommittee recommends further discussion of the proposal by the Finance Committee? If you agree, then it means you would recommend further discussion by the Finance Committee of this proposal. Well, the question again is that the Public Works Subcommittee recommends further discussion of the proposal in PWSC 2023-24-1. If you agree, that is, you would recommend further discussion by the Finance Committee, raise your hand. One would recommend that. One would agree with that. If you object to it, then it means you think that further discussion is not required. Well, I can see that there are some of you have objected to it, so this is not passed. So further discussion by the Finance Committee is not required. All right, thank you, everyone. Next item. Well, I hope that the public housing development can be completed as soon as possible so that more members of the public can move into such flats as soon as possible. Well, I can see that there are 6 members who have pressed the request to speak button. Well, the next item is site formation and infrastructure works for public housing developments at Chak Road South and Parkton Extension, Sham Shui Po, PWSC 2023-24-2. It is suggested that this is to be upgraded to Category A. The amount needed would be $253.4 million. On 6th of February 2023, the administration consulted the panel on housing on the proposal. Panel members supported the submission of the funding proposal to the subcommittee for consideration. A report on the gist was sent to members for reference via email yesterday. Well, those who are here today to answer the questions include Mr. Andrew Lam, Assistant Director of Housing, Mr. Tsuen Wan from the Housing Bureau, Chief Civil Engineer, Ms. Hamida Haroon, Chief Architect from the Housing Department, Mr. Victor Chan, Project Manager from the CEDD, Mr. Clarence Young, Chief Engineer from the CEDD, and Mr. Curtis Chu, Chief Transport Officer from the Transport Department. Now, 6 members have pressed the request to speak button. First, it would be Mr. Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chair. In the panel of housing meeting, I have raised a question. Well, it divided Chak Road into 2 in the proposal. So I've asked whether they can be connected by a podium. In the document, it was said that there are 2 reasons. Well, one is that the road is a public road. The water supplies department and the drainage services department would need to have access to that for inspections. Also, it's an ventilation corridor. So I want to follow up on that. Well, the podium on both sides, how far is it from the surface of Chak Road? So that just these are the only two.
係多謝主席。
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Andrew Lam. In the document, it was mentioned Chak Road South needs to allow vehicles on the ground to pass Chak Road South as well as the service reservoir. And Lai Chikok drainage tunnel intake facilities. There are relevant development facilities passing Chak Road South. The WSD and DSD needs to conduct examination round the clock. So we have to preserve a passageway for public roads. We have considered Chairman, I do not want a waste of time. This is a simple question. You already have a preliminary design for both platforms. Is it 10 meters or 9 meters away from Chak Road? You said that you would need to reserve a passageway for maintenance. But then the vehicle is not as high as 10 meters tall, is that correct? For Chak Road South, we need to reserve a 10-meter wide deck for air quality. So there is a restriction of the line measuring 10 meters. So for the public housing estates in Park 10, there is at least 20 meters difference or setback. Well, I mean the podium height to be exact. It's about the height, not the width. Right now, according to our preliminary design, both public housing estates will have a podium of 2 to 3 stories high, so the height is some 20 meters. In the design, we are considering whether there is any elevated passageway for pedestrians connecting the two public housing estates. Thank you for your reply. So that is not a technical point rendering it impossible. Your reply actually gave me an impression that because of technicalities, because of ventilation, because of maintenance, you cannot construct it, but then in fact you can do it. I'd like to confirm this point. You can go on. What about the width? Is it 3 meters or 10 meters wide? Make it easier for connection. If you really have this intention, then for the figure of $200 million or so, you will have to factor it in the detailed design at a later stage. Has it been incorporated? Will it be included? We are applying for funding from the Finance Committee, and it is mainly now about the site formation works as well as the infrastructure works. If in the future we need to connect the two public housing estates by way of a passageway, it will be incorporated into the Hong Kong Housing Authority, the construction of public housing estates. It will be included into that scope. Do you mean that it will not be included in this, project? Yes, indeed. Next, Mr. Lam Chun Sing. Basically, I support this proposal. In the urban area, we can build public housing estates. Well, I support it, especially in Sham Shui Po, where a lot of grassroots people live. It is indeed very good for us to build public housing estates, but then I'm concerned about future plan. As Chak Estate, it is in the Sham Shui Po area, but it is like an isolated island, so to speak. In the past, a lot of people in the community and district councillors asking whether it is possible to build a bridge connecting the places. There are a lot of elderly people living in the area. If they need to do grocery shopping in Chak, it is actually somewhat inconvenient. In the past, we couldn't solve the problem, but in the future, when we build public housing estates, it seems that there is a hope. Above it will be Chak Estate, beneath it will be Pak Tin Estate. So, the whole plot of land will also be a land of public housing estates, and quite a lot of elderly people and grassroots people in Sham Shui Po will live there. So, when the site is formed and when the public housing estates are constructed, what about the plot of land connecting Chak Estate and Pak Tin Estate? What facilities do you have for the convenience of the residents living therein? I'd like to know more about the grand planning in your mind. Assistant Director. Thank you, Mr. Lam. We understand your concern about the ventilation or connection between different housing estates. Right now, there is a passageway spanning Long Yut Road, leading to Chak Road South. To its side, we are building a lift. In the future, it will also be a barrier-free facility leading to our public housing developments. It is also proposed in Pak Tin Extension, a pedestrian connection facility will be connected to a lift tower, leading to Pak Tin Estate. So in the future, there will be a public transport interchange to take buses to different areas. They will save some 200 meters of walking distance if they go to Shak MTR station. Next, Mr. Chen Pui Leung, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. In the land formation photograph, there is a provisional driving testing center, DTC. It will be provided in the new area to be constructed. With the reprovisioning of the DTC, there will be a lot of learning drivers and drivers undergoing tests. The traffic impact has already been evaluated and it could be solved, but I'm still worried if the DTC is located there. With a lot of people living in the public housing developments, especially when we have Chak Road South nearby. Can the learning drivers and the test takers go there? If so, this will cause traffic congestion, and this will have an impact on the traffic flow in the locality. What is your evaluation in this connection? Assistant Director, please. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chan, for your concern. According to the consultancy company and the CEDD, the evaluation is as such. For the proposed public housing estate, The evaluation result is that the re-provided DTC will not bring any insurmountable challenges or difficulties to the residents that will be living nearby. According to the TD, no one can learn to drive in the morning and in the evening in the area, and this will be conducive to improving the road traffic conditions in the area. For details, I will defer to Transport Department. Mr. Chiu from the TD, thank you. For the re-provided DTC, it will actually have a standalone access on Nam Chang Street. It will not go through the roundabout. The TD can actually regulate the road testing route. Our examiners can make arrangements. For the testing route, we estimate that it will go through the same route, and we will have regard to the traffic conditions to set the testing route so that we will allay the concerns in relation to the testing route. Any follow-up? No follow-up. Next, Deputy Chair, Mr. Tung Li-Te. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the proposed DTC. With the current proposal, I'd like to clarify if the present driving test center is to be moved. The current amount did not take into account the provisional DTC for site formation, etc. Well, I'm not sure. It was not included yet, is that correct? In paragraph 2, well, it should be paragraph 3 in the paper. It was not mentioned. In addition, for DTC to Park 1 Street, what is the land use? Why do you have to move it once again? Why do you not consider using it as TDC? Instead, you have to move it twice. What is the reason behind? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Te. First of all, on the moving of the DTC, in order to hand over the formed land to the housing authority for the relevant works, the government has already obtained funding of Category D as the construction fund. The fund is actually in paragraph 26 of the paper. The figure is $16.7 million in MOD prices. In November 2022, the works have already been started. The DTC will be commissioned in August 2023 for the figure of $16.7 million. It includes the site formation works of Park 1 Street. There is a vacant site and the construction of a one-story high provisional DTC, as well as the demolition of the current Chak Road DTC. As to the question about planning, all along, the government, including the TD, the Housing Department, have communicated and considered how to re-provide the DTC, as we cannot identify yet another location for the reprovisioning of the DTC. We want to dovetail with the one land multiple use policy. after considering the feasibility and the impact on traffic and the environment, the government thinks that we can leverage on the proposed plan to reduce any waste of the resources, so that we have agreed that under the proposed project we will provide the DTC. The question is actually very clear now that it can be used as a provisional DTC. Why cannot we make it a long-term DTC? So that is a question.
Well, I can see that Mr. Chen Fuk-yu has raised his hand. The speaker did not turn on the mic. All right, you can hear me, right? On Pak Tin Street, as a temporary DTC, it's quite small. Actually, with the planning of the site, it's because it doesn't have any long-term development plans that we can use it as a temporary DTC. Well, we can't use it on a long-term basis. It's because the site is quite small. And the existing DTC would have parking spaces for examinees, but the one on Pak Tin Street does not have such. So we think it is unsuitable to be used on a long-term basis. Well, I want to follow up on this, Chair. My concern is that because it is moved so frequently, and you said that further funding would be sought for that. Well, how are you going to deal with this temporary DTC afterwards? Is it suitable for something else in future? Or is it going to be converted back into a green belt? Because we have a shortage of land in urban areas, as we all know. Can you provide more information on that? Thank you. Well, I think you need to give more information on that as well, because if the site is so small, why can't you extend the site? Since you have land for public housing, and you have to provision the driving test center at that area, you can't just explain it by saying we're adopting the concept of single site multiple use. Well, thank you, Chair and Member. I'll give a more comprehensive explanation. Actually, on Pak Wen Street, one side would be the Pak Wen Street, the road, and another side would be a steep slope on top of it. Would be the site that we're seeking approval endorsement for. So the slope wouldn't allow for further development. Thank you, Chair. Well, perhaps you can give a written reply after a meeting, because the explanation you gave here is quite brief, because members have their concerns about if you can use it on a temporary basis, why can't you use it on a long-term basis? And if you can explain more about that, giving the technical difficulties information on that, I think you need to give more information in your written reply. Next, Dr. Tick, please. I want to know more about the welfare facilities to be provided. You would again have 5% of the land of the area to be allocated for welfare facilities. I can see that the lot is quite small. The welfare facilities should be reprovisioned, should be provided in the domestic housing blocks. Can you confirm if it is the case? Also, well, they are to have service teams as well as services to be provided for feral elderly persons, etc. I think such facilities are appropriate and would match the demand of the district, so I do appreciate that. But I do have a suggestion. I believe in future, as there are more public housing projects to be completed, I want the department or the bureau to have better plans, like a 5-year plan for welfare facilities. You shouldn't do it by projects. You should have like an overall plan of what facilities to be provided. Also, that would help with the deployment of manpower. Of course, this is not to be discussed today, but I hope that my suggestion is relayed to the relevant departments. While the Public Works Subcommittee, we will only discuss works-related content. Well, what you said earlier would relate to policies. Of course, we would want the departments to think about that not on a by project basis, but based on what facilities are needed territory-wide. So when there is land available, if such facilities can be provided, that would be ideal. So I think what Dr. Tick said is correct, but perhaps you should go to the relevant panel to talk about that, so that the administration would have a better overall plan instead of going by projects. I think that it would also facilitate members in giving their suggestions. It would also allow the members of the public to have a better understanding of the situation. But unfortunately, this is not dealt with here, and you can go to the relevant panel to talk about that. Well, I also want to ask whether the 5% also applies to this proposal, and whether the welfare facilities are to be provided in domestic housing blocks. Perhaps the assistant director can answer that. Well, thank you, Dr. Tick. Well, I do confirm that we would comply with the requirement of allocating 5% of the area for non-domestic facilities or social welfare facilities. Well, as the member has noted, because the lot is quite small, it's only 0.7 hectares, we do not have additional space for a standalone building for the welfare facilities. That's why the facilities will be located on the lower floors, the podium levels of the buildings, the house domestic blocks. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Man Kwong. Thank you, Chair. Actually, in the panel of housing meeting, when this proposal was discussed, many members, including me, have expressed concerns about the design of the roundabout on Chak Road South, whether it can indeed be connected to Long Yut Road. Well, from the paper provided by the administration, they said the technical difficulties encountered to be connected to connect the road to the Long Yut Road. And I've asked my friends in engineering, they do agree that the direction to be taken by the department is indeed correct. But since you cannot connect the road to Long Yut Road, how do you prevent the vehicles passing from Nam Chuan Street to Long Yut Road from that affecting the flow of vehicles in that section of the road after a public housing project is completed? So I do want to ask if the road improvement works would indeed resolve the issue of traffic congestion on Long Yut Road and Nam Chuan Street, obstructing the traffic at Chak Road South. So I want to know if the department can provide more information on that, on the design. Well, my next point is not related to the site information works, but many members, including I, are concerned about Chak Road South. Because right now on Long Yut Road and Chak Road, this K98 pedestrian footbridge, they are currently constructing a lift tower for better access of residents. Well, actually, on both sides, there are slopes, steep slopes. Well, is it possible when you're constructing the roundabout on Chak Road South, after the public housing project has been completed, can you convert this access on K98 to have it connected to the podium of the public housing project so that people do not have to go to Chak Road South before they go back up onto the public housing project? Perhaps when you are constructing the public housing project, if you can have the access connected to the public housing project, it should facilitate residents going downhill to other areas. Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Leung, for your question and suggestions. With regard to design and road improvement works, I'll let my colleague from the CEDD reply to that. Mr. Chan, thank you. Member, regarding the junction between Nam Chang Street and Long Yun Road, as said earlier, we will add another lane on that road. So it should accommodate more vehicles. It should be able to sufficiently meet the future demand. There shouldn't be any traffic congestion. With regard to pedestrian connectivity, as said earlier, there's a pedestrian footbridge that was span across Long Yut Road and go to Chak Road South. So pedestrians can conveniently get from Chak Road South to Pak Tin Extension, that is the public housing project. And they can also get to Pak Tin Estate on a lower level. Well, I do have something to follow up. I do understand that what they said, but I do want to know if the administration would reserve space to connect to another site in Pak Tin Street so that pedestrians don't have to go back to the ground level. They can just stay on podium level. So that is what I want. That is what I suggested. Well, perhaps after a meeting, we can look into what you said and liaise with the relevant colleagues. Next, Mr. Louis Leung. Well, Chair, again, I am quite concerned about what is being done with the driving test center, DTC. Well, the administration did say the temporary driving test center, the site is not suitable to be used on a long-term basis. Well, with regard to technical requirements, technical difficulties, etc., if you can use it on a temporary basis, there's no way you can't use it on a long-term basis. Also, with regard to this site area, it's 7,400 square meters. That is 0.74 hectares. The plot ratio is 9. So in total, it would be 66,600 square meters in floor area. If you do not reprovision the driving test center there, you can have more open space, or you can construct more domestic blocks there. When there is such a shortage in urban areas, why don't you consider making the temporary DTC permanent so that the gross floor area can be allocated for public housing instead.
Assistant Director, could you further elaborate on this point? Thank you, Mr. Louis Long. Thank you, Chairman. For the temporary DTC, I will defer to the TD to supplement on this regarding recreational facilities. We understand that the public has needs for such recreational facilities, and we will, according to the Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines, provide not less than 1 square meter recreational facility for each citizen. Right now we have 2,700 square meters for such facilities, and we will also have different facilities for senior citizens and children alike, such as basketball court, so that we will be able to cater for the needs of different people in the community. Mr. Chiu from TD, please. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Louis Long. It was mentioned, and I believe you are aware, that there is an integrated driving test. There will be other tests before the road test. After moving to Park 1 Street, there will be a reduction of 60% of the area. And when we move to Park 1 Street, we have made a major adjustment. Because of the small size, we cannot test reverse parking. We can only conduct road testing. So we need to conduct the driving tests in different areas. To new candidates, they cannot use these sites anymore. We have to make adjustments. And of course, in the future, it will be ideal for us to have a site on which we can conduct both reverse parking and road tests. This will be more desirable. After meeting, the administration can give us a reply. Is it possible for us to further expand land? You are saying that because of the small size of the area, you cannot conduct all the tests. So, can we further expand land? We have reason to cast doubt on this. Is it possible for us to expand the provisional DTC? It may be under the purview of the planning department. Well, with social welfare facilities, not just the public housing estate residents, all the residents in the locality can also have access to different recreational facilities and other facilities to enjoy it. But I think that the administration can provide a detailed response in the written reply. Well, Chairman, we are on the same wavelength. Thank you. You've said all I wanted to say. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwok. I'd like to follow up on the provisional DTC. I'd like to ask whether we need to have a provisional TDC over there. I've been teaching there for a decade or so. I go to that area frequently. Actually, there is a certain level of danger to a new driver or to a learning driver to drive in that area. Is it necessary to have a driving testing center in that area? Thank you, Ms. Lillian Kwok. For the DTC in Chak Road South, it came into operations in 1995. The government has considered the testing routes and other factors, and the public are familiar with the routes, so without compromising the testing routes in the vicinity, we would like to identify an area for the provisional DTC. In relation to the detailed contents, I'd like to see whether my colleague from TD has anything else to add. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member. As I explained, it has a long history, and it is one of the testing centers in Kowloon. The existing land will be used to build public housing developments. There is a long waiting time for driving tests, and these projects have a bearing on the waiting time of the driving tests. We would like the reprovisioning to take place in the original location, but if we have to identify yet another location, we really need to look for a suitable location for us to provide the DTC. Honestly, for drivers, they need to drive on the road instead of any particular road, instead of any designated road. Is it really that difficult for you to identify some new routes? Is it not possible? You are affecting public developments in the whole locality. So we need to consider the price ratio, that is, the cost effectiveness. Mr. Long also mentioned that there is a slope. You really need to plan well for the pedestrian connectivity system. Do not make them go uphill, downhill, again and again. You should make it accessible to Shak Kip Mei in order to provide convenience for those living in Chak estate. Well, I hope that you will consider this. Pedestrian connectivity is very important, and future developments are targeting at improving pedestrian connectivity. Thank you, Ms. Lillian Kwok. We will relay your views to the relevant departments. In the course of construction, we will closely monitor the traffic flow as well as the relevant measures. The public are concerned whether there will be any traffic congestion, and we will keep that in view. For the design and layout of public housing developments, we will give due consideration to pedestrian connectivity. It is also one of the important principles of sustainable development, and we will handle this problem very cautiously. All of us are concerned about the DTC. Maybe it is not necessary in the future. Probably we do not need any drivers on the road. There will be unmanned driving on the road. Next, Mr. Chen Xiu-hong. Thank you, Chairman. A lot of members are concerned about the reprovisioning of the DTC, as suggested by the Chairman and other members. We would like the administration to provide more information in the reply after the meeting. Can we locate another location? Well, I have 2 points to make. For the reprovisioning of the DTC in the same area, can we solve the problem of the long waiting time of the driving tests? Well, I think it cannot be solved. What the Chairman said is in the future, But in a shorter term, it is not ideal for the public to wait for a very long time before they can take a test. The CEDD has commissioned a consultancy company to conduct a traffic impact assessment. The result is that after the construction of the proposed developments, the relevant developments will be able to solve traffic issues. All these start from the angle of traffic congestion. There will be some 1,000 involving 2,000 people or so. There will be senior citizens as well as young children. Given the invaluable land resources, maybe they will not be re-provisioned. We will build a passageway leading to Pak Tin Estate. With the population intake of 2,000 odd people, what is the environment of the passageway for them to go home? There used to be fewer people living there. But when we have pedestrians, both senior citizens and young children alike, it is still suitable for us to put this facility there. Well, in the document, it also includes the points that are close to the heart of Mr. Chen Xiu-hong. Thank you, Mr. Chen. We will supplement information after the meeting. Apart from that, the Housing Department and the relevant departments are discussing the reprovisioning of the DTC. That is, the design of the DTC and the relevant details. We will incorporate the relevant requirements into our development plan. On the waiting time of driving tests, will it be improved? I will defer to the TD. For traffic impact assessment, I'd like to defer to the CEDD for a brief reply. Mr. Chiu from the TD. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member. We work very hard to identify suitable locations for DTC. I believe when we have one fewer testing center, this will have a bearing on the waiting time of driving tests. We have already explained the relevant matter in the PAC. Driving examiners will work overtime to increase the number of driving tests in order to compress the timeline or the waiting time of driving tests. There needs to be a location for us to have driving tests. So all driving testing centers are actually very valuable. These are valuable resources. On pedestrian safety, after a population intake of 2,000 odd people, will pedestrian connectivity be at odds with the safety of pedestrian? On safety, with the DTC being reprovisioned in Pak Tin Estate, its access will be on Nam Chung Street. For the two public housing estates, the two access will be on Chak Road South. So the testing routes will not conflict with the routes of pedestrian. We will also provide enough facilities and guidelines in relation to safety. What I'm the most concerned is not the access, but instead the entire road network. After the After the project is commissioned, when pedestrians enter the housing estate, they will less frequently take the passageway leading to Nam Chang Street. Instead, if they can enter the housing estate directly, then this will reduce the time of them walking on the ground, where there is also driving learner. If so, then this can reduce the risk and safety of pedestrians.
Perhaps I'll give a brief reply on that. For example, for Chak May MTR station and Baektin Estate bus terminus, if people wish to get from there to the housing estate, they can take the route at Baektin Estate. They can take the lift to get to the level of Chak Road South and go to the public housing development through the footbridge. They do not have to go through the ground service. Also, with regard to the two future public housing projects, they will have 8 bus routes and 4 minibus routes. After the improvement works at Chak Road South have been conducted, we would have enough parking spaces for buses and minibuses. They can also use the roundabout, so it shouldn't conflict with pedestrian traffic on Nam Chang Street. Well, members have raised their concerns about the temporary driving test center and where it is to be reprovisioned and the traffic arrangements. The administration is to provide a written reply. I myself took a driving test on Nam Chang Street. Well, the traffic flow is definitely not as busy as it is today. I passed that driving test in one go, but now I don't know if I'll pass the test with the current circumstances. So I think the administration will have to think about that. Next, Mr. Frankie Yik. I believe many members have expressed their concern about the DTC. I believe I've heard complaints about people having to wait very long to take driving tests, especially those who need to immigrate. That would pose difficulties for them. Well, I've heard many times that there have been inadequate DTCs. I've myself have raised 3 possibilities, 3 suitable sites to be for DTCs. I believe there is much objection anywhere a DTC is to be relocated anyway. Of course, if we can accommodate both people and vehicles, that would be great. I never heard learner drivers having traffic accidents in the past 10 years, actually. I think it is a necessary public facility. Of course, it can be relocated. It would be nice. However, as said earlier, over the past 10 years, I haven't heard of such accidents, so I think such facility will be needed if a suitable site cannot be identified elsewhere. I hope members should take that into account so that people don't have to wait for years to take the driving test. Thank you, Chair. Well, I believe it is something that is on a policy level. I think we have to wait to discuss that at a panel on transport. Well, in future, if we have self-driving cars, we would not have this issue. But of course, that will be many years in the future. I would agree with what Mr. Frankie Yik said. If there are more DTCs, it should alleviate the problem, so people don't have to wait so long to take the driving test. There being no further questions. Oh, well, actually, Mr. Ling Hon Pu. Well, actually, when this is put to vote, before this is put to vote, I would like to ask the question: if we are putting to vote, if we do not want to recommend further discussion by the Finance Committee, I've noted that in this proposal in paragraph 5, the administration said they will update the estimated cost and cash flow of the project with reference to the return tender price, etc., before the Finance Committee meeting. So when we're putting this item to vote, will the FC be able to see the updated figures and compare them with the original figures? Well, actually, even if the figures are passed by the subcommittee, if there are any updates to the figures, they will do it before the FC meeting. As for whether it warrants further discussion, well, as you know about the mechanism, if you do not recommend further discussion by the Finance Committee, however, before the Finance Committee meeting, if you think there is such need, the Finance Committee will take that suggestion into account and perhaps discuss that at the meeting. As you see, what happened before was, for example, the figures have been updated, for example, after they have new tenders and they have the need to update the figures. If you have such a need, you can raise it before the Finance Committee meeting. All right, well, let's put this item to vote. For those who agree to the proposal, I believe most people agree. I can see that all members unanimously agree on the proposal. So this is endorsed. Next, again, a standard procedure. Would the subcommittee recommend further discussion of the proposal by the Finance Committee? Now, specifically, whether the Public Works Subcommittee would recommend further discussion of the proposal in PWSC 2023-24-2 by the Finance Committee. If you agree to it, that would mean that you think it needs further discussion. If you object to it, no. All right. Most of members would object to this question, and this does not need further discussion by the Finance Committee. Well, it was raised during discussions that a written reply has to be given by the relevant departments. The departments would have to give that written reply before the FC meeting. All right, thank you, colleagues from the government departments. Next agenda item number 3, 414 improvement works at Mui Wo, PWSC 2023-24-3. This document seeks to upgrade part of 414 to Category A at an estimated cost of $897.6 million in money of the day prices. On 31st of January this year, the panel on development was consulted. Panel members supported the submission of the funding proposal to the subcommittee for consideration. A report on the gist of the discussion was sent to members for reference via email yesterday. While the government representatives who are here to answer the question would include Mr. David Lam, Under Secretary for Development, Mr. Alan Wong, Chief Assistant Secretary for Development, Mr. Jackie Wu, Head of Sustainable Lantau Office from CEDD, and Ms. Elsa Chak, Deputy Head of the Sustainable Lantau Office, also from the CEDD. I can see that 6 members have pressed the request to speak button. Well, actually 7 members. If you will have 4 minutes per round, it will go past 10:30, but we have a Finance Committee meeting at 10:45. Well, we can go beyond 10:30, but we can't go that much over. If you wish to pass this item today, perhaps members would have to be brief. Well, if we have 7 members, we'll have 3 minutes per round. So if we can see if we can deal with this item today. Mr. Chen Hock-Feng, I'll be brief. Actually, it's the same few questions. I would support the proposal, of course, because it would improve the facilities at Mui Wo. It also rationalizes the layout in the area but I have to follow up on a few issues. One, after the works have been completed, the traffic capacity of Mui Wo is not enhanced because with the connection to Tongchong, it has not been enhanced still. So if you have to get into Mui Wo, the access is quite narrow. With the improvement works, after the improvement works have been done, you want more tourists there. But if you can't improve the traffic congestion at the access, that would be of no use. So when will you deal with that? Also, second, with the cycle parking spaces, even if you have that many of them, if it's not convenient, they are of no use. So would you have any ancillary facilities? Will you have anything to follow on that? Perhaps you will deploy manpower there to clear up any abandoned vehicles or bicycles. Third, you would have electric vehicle charging facilities in the parking areas. Are you sure that all charging facilities will be provided at all parking spaces there? Also, I can see that there are 4 parking spaces for coaches. Have you evaluated whether there is indeed enough? Because Mui Wo is a popular tourist destination, can you have more parking spaces for coaches? Thank you, Chair. Regarding what Mr. Chen said regarding the Mui Wo connectivity to Mui Wo, the government is now doing a technical feasibility study to see if conductivity can be improved. We have considered different proposals. Perhaps we will consider the connectivity to Sunny Bay and to Discovery Bay. So we would want to improve connectivity from the northern and southern part of Mui Wo. Also, we would also have to take into account pedestrian capacity. Certain pedestrians would ride bicycles to get to the pier to go to work. So we have provided 100 bicycle parking spaces near the pier. Well, in total, 1,000 parking spaces would be provided for bicycles, but in particular, 100 would be provided near the pier to facilitate residents. Also, with regard to the joint user building, there would be cycle parking spaces. With regard to charging facilities, we would provide charging facilities for all parking spaces. All right, next, Mr. Lam Chansing. Thank you, Chair. You'll have 3 minutes. All right, in paragraph 11, after Gazetto, well, you have received objections and many of the objections cannot be resolved. I want to ask, what are the views specifically? Also, there is now a cooked food market next to the pier. When there is the new one, whether the old operators can transition into the new one, would they be affected? That's my second point. The third point is, in future, there will be facilities such as public toilet, etc. Would you be able to provide facilities for mothers to take care of babies? Because it's not just for residents. Many tourists would visit Mui Wo during the weekend. So that's my third question. Thank you. Well, regarding details on the objections, I'll let my colleague from the CEDD answer that. As for the cooked food market, we would want to minimize the impact costs to current operators. So right now we will do the works in phases. We'll construct a new cooked food market and then we'll demolish the existing cooked food market. We are currently liaising with the operators to see if they want to continue their business in the new market. If they want to do that, there will be seamless transition. Well, the public toilet would also have facilities for mothers to take care of their babies. Thank you. Well, I'll perhaps give a brief reply. There are 3 objections one is on parking spaces. They object to having parking spaces near the waterfront. They would suggest constructing a multi-story car park elsewhere. However, right now we'll terminate the short-term tenancy of a car park for this proposal, so we need to provision more parking spaces near the waterfront. As for the car park at the ex-secondary school site, the administration is considering whether it is to be developed for public housing. So right now it is not suitable to be used as a car park. Another objection is on the bus stop. Well, it is to be relocated to somewhere close to the residents, and they object to that. Well, we have implemented measures so that where passengers would get on or get off the buses would be far away from the residents. Also, between the bus terminus, near the bus terminus, we will plant more vegetation so that it would minimize the visual impact to residents. We would also retain 6 trees. Because in the town center, if we have to avoid these Ficus macrocarpa, fig trees, we would need to do a lot. So we would suggest transplanting these 6 trees to somewhere in the vicinity instead for now. Thank you.
Please manage the time well. Next, Mr. Kenneth Falk. I'll be succinct. I'm concerned about the cycle track. It is 400 meters long, not very long. It is divided into different sections, into 4 sections in total. It goes through refuse collection point, parking spaces for private cars, taxi stand, etc. The intent is good, but then there is also hidden danger. It is quite dangerous for all the cycles to stop waiting for cars to drive past the road. I understand that the joint user building is still being planned, but I hope that more arts exhibits will be used, as these are very important if we want to attract people to take photographs. If we can engage more local artists, then we will be able to drive forward this idea. Thank you. We will consider how we can add more local elements for cycle track. As we can see from NS1 and 2, after all, there are vehicles on the road. So cyclists will have to get off from time to time. This cannot be avoided for safety's sake. If there are famous movies that were shot there, then a lot of people will go to that place. If you point up signage there, then we can spice up the tourist attractions there. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwok. While I support this proposal, I once worked in Mui Wo as well. I'd like to ask about the leisure and recreational facilities. What do they include? Under Secretary, please, paragraph 29 in the paper. Thank you, Ms. Lillian Kwok. Mainly, we provide more recreational space. First, 1,700-meter entrance plaza in the platform of the cooked food market. There will be a podium as well. We will also have a promenade connecting the northern and the southern Mui Wo. There will be 2 promenades, providing recreational and leisure facilities. A little bit follow-up. Especially after the new territories Hung-Yi Kuk Southern District Secondary School, there is no community center for the residents there. The graduation ceremony even needed to take place in the sports center, occupying the space over there. Well, you need to consider the long-term planning. Apart from tourism, you also need to take into account the needs of local residents. So, we need to cater for the needs of local residents. You need to hold public consultation to cater for their needs. Next, on the cooked food market. About relocation, seamless transition, this is indeed very good. When it comes to relocation, will you have subsidies or allowances for them? They are small businesses. They are mainly villagers in the area. How will you handle this? For cycle track, for bicycle parking spaces. You are aware that people living there need to rush to the pier to catch ferries. So how can you enable them to go to the pier in a safe manner? Your suggestion was indeed good. After population intake, you will see that different private cars are parked everywhere. They are dotted around the locality, and these are points of concern. We need to face this question. 1. On community center. Although we cannot handle community center, it is an entrance plaza after all. We will also take into account these factors. For cooked food market, we are in close liaison with the operators of the market. If the FEHD, there will be special arrangements for them to be transitioned to new cooked food markets. On page 2 of NS1, near the pier in the entrance plaza, there are 8 parking spaces. This will provide convenience to people rushing to the pier for ferry. Right now, there are 68 parking spaces with short-term contract. There will be 92 parking spaces, that is up by 24 parking spaces to meet the short-term demand. Mr. Benson Look, Mr. Holden Chow, Mr. Louis Long are in the line. Each of you 3 minutes, then we will go beyond 10:30 by a little bit. It is possible that we will get everything done. I believe that all of us want to get all this done as soon as possible, as the improvement works in Muiwo are a pressing issue, especially to local residents. Mr. Benson Look for 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Overall, I support this proposal. I am concerned about the charging facilities in the parking spaces. On the 31st of January, in the panel on development, on the last occasion, the government mentioned for 92 parking spaces, up by 24 parking spaces, of which 68 parking spaces have been equipped with electric vehicles charging facilities. By 2027, this project will have been completed, and I believe that you understand in 2023, the government will stop issuing the license for petroleum gas vehicles. In the future 3 years, we will add 7,000 parking spaces equipped with charging facilities for EVs. There are following 3 inquiries. First, on the 60-odd parking spaces, do they include, are they included in the 7,000-odd parking spaces mentioned in the policy address? Are these 60-odd parking spaces equipped with charging facilities included in the grant sum? According to the meeting record of the panel on development, you will discuss with the relevant departments the timeline of the installation of EV charging facilities. Can you explain to us and can you bring us up to speed on what factors are included in the installation of these facilities? Thank you, Mr. Benson Lo. Well, I have a little bit of an update. We mentioned there would be 68 parking facilities equipped with EV charging. After discussion with the EPD, all 92 new parking spaces will be equipped with EV charging facilities, and the expenses are already included in the grant sum. I'm not sure if they are included in the grant total amount in the policy address. I do not have information right now with me. But then for all the parking spaces, they are already equipped with EV charging facilities. Well, this deserves applause. Environmental protection is close to our heart. The more EV charging facilities, the better. Next, Mr. Holden Chow. I support this proposal, and I have been waiting for this project for so long, as have many residents in the locality. In paragraph 8 and 9 of the papers, according to the plan, the parking spaces for coaches will be relocated in another area. Right now, there are 4 parking spaces for coaches. Through the enhancement arrangements in a new location, how many parking spaces for coaches will there be? Can you add more? Well, with more tourists, then we need more supporting facilities for tourists. I see that you have done a lot on parking spaces for cycles, but then you also need to work on the parking spaces for coaches. Otherwise, it will be chaotic. Thank you, member. On the parking spaces for coaches, there are 4 parking spaces for coaches, and our projects on this occasion will not have any bearing on the existing 4 parking spaces. We will monitor the situation closely. We understand that Mui Wo has other improvement works in a pipeline, and we hope to work on this front as well. Just to follow up, with more footfall in the future, I hope that more people will be drawn to Mui Wo. Hence, there is indeed a greater need for parking spaces for coaches. Right now, there are 4, and this is not sufficient. This is a pragmatic matter. We indeed need these facilities. That is more parking spaces for coaches. Next, Mr. Louis Long. I support this proposal. Public consultation started in March 2017. Today, it is April 2023, and it has been 6 years. With the approval of the Finance Committee, it still requires 4.5 years. So altogether, it will take a decade, and we do not have a lot of decades in our life. Time is limited, so we need to compress the timeline so that the public can enjoy the improvement works as soon as possible. This is my first comment. In paragraph 14 of the papers, the annual recurring expenditure arising from the proposed works is about $13.3 million, and I'd like to know more about the recurring expenditure. What does it include? First point, why does the improvement work take so long? We started public consultation in 2021. After 4 years or so, these will take place in phases. For the promenade in the southern Mui Wo area, we want to build more parking spaces for cycles. Then, after moving the parking spaces for bicycles, then we will construct a bus terminus, after which we will build a cooked food market. For example, it took 3 years to build a cooked food market. the time mark of 4 years is the final completion of the improvement works. Next, on recurrent expenditure. For the routine management of the FEHD, we need cleaners, we need daily maintenance workers, and they will be factored in the recurrent expenditure.
I do want to follow up on this. I would understand what the administration said. Well, you're doing it in phases, that is good. However, during consultations, if the residents are generally in support of that, why do you have to do so many rounds of consultation? I think there is room for improvement on that regard. Well, if there being no further questions from the members, I'll put this to vote. For members supporting this proposal, please raise your hands. I believe it is unanimously agreed. Indeed, all members would agree. Well, as most members agree this proposal, this is endorsed. Next, we have to put to vote the question that the Public Works Subcommittee whether it recommends further discussion of the proposal by the Finance Committee, that is PWSC 2023-24-3. If you agree, that is, if you think it needs further discussion, no one raised their hands. All right, if you object, we all think it should be passed as soon as possible. Okay, so most members would object to this. That is, the subcommittee does not recommend further discussion of this proposal by the Finance Committee. Right, thank you, members. Well, I would like to say that regarding the discussion of this item, members have been quite brief. We all want this passed as soon as possible so that the works can be started as soon as possible. But the time that we save is not much compared to the overall time taken. So most members are very urgent about this. They want this to be expedited so that residents can take advantage and make use of such works as soon as possible. Thank you. All right, we have passed 3 items today. It is expected that in May or later they will be submitted to the Finance Committee for consideration. The next meeting will take place on the 26th of April at 8:30 in the morning. So members, please be punctual for attendance of the meeting. This is the end of the meeting. Thank you.